So our next session is also an interview. It's called Energy Transition and the Commodity Crunch, Impacts of the Maritime Industry in the Near Term and Beyond. I would like to invite to the stage Mr. Erik Strømsø, who's the Managing Director at BW Renewables, and Mr. Joachim Skorge, who's the Managing Director and Regional Head of Asia Pacific and the Middle East at DNB Markets. Please. Mr. Strømsø, who was previously a senior equity partner at Pareto Securities, joined as Managing Director of BW Renewables in 2021 and is now responsible for scaling BW's investments in the renewable space. So a very interesting position, and we look forward to his views. Mr. Skorge has led DNB's investment banking team in Singapore for over 15 years, and his experience in shipping finance takes him back over 25 years, working across geographies in Oslo, New York, and of course, here in Singapore. So thank you both gentlemen, and Joachim, please, over to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Thank you for the introduction, and welcome, Erik. Good to have you here with us today. You have recently taken on a very exciting management position with the BW Group, focusing on renewables and energy transition. So I think we're very keen to learn more about that today, and also a little bit more about the thinking around, within the BW Group when it comes to this transition. And also, I think it's a very timely topic given what's happening in the world with rising energy prices across the board. Also a lot more focus on energy security than we saw even last year. So I think it's a very timely topic that we are about to touch upon today. So again, thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let's start with the first question. BW has its origin within the transport of hydrocarbons, also other types of shipping, but mainly hydrocarbons. Over the years, the business has become more and more diversified, different types of shipping. You even invested into a fairly substantial oil and gas business with BW Energy. But over the past few years, you've also been diversifying beyond that and into renewables in particular, and also technology related to renewables. This is obviously very exciting. I think it's very much in tune with the times. I think we would be keen to learn a little bit more about the thinking beyond this or behind the diversification. And the simple question is also, are you doing this to do good, or is it to make money, or is it a little bit of both?
Thank you. Well, I mean, it's a question we get asked a lot. As a shipping company, what are you guys up to? And I think we're a family-owned business, first of all, so our perspective tends to be quite far into the future, and we always try to make sure that our strategy and asset mix is as future-proof as it can be. Our crystal ball is no better than anybody else's, but at least that's the goal. And looking sort of 10, 20 years into the future, and decades of that. If you think about the energy transition, one of the first kind of steps that we made into the transition investing, if you will, was the investment that Worldwide made into Bergesen in 2003 in Norway, which at the time was a major push into shipping of gas, which was a cleaner and remains a cleaner fuel, and something which at the time we saw as something which would have more longevity in terms of the energy value chain of the future, and something that could act as part of the transition. And I think we're definitely seeing that play out today. So it goes back a long time. Somewhat more recently, we also had our BW Ventures, which was about 10 years ago. We made a lot of investments into smaller, more kind of startup early stage companies within the maritime and green energy space. I think arguably some of those were probably a bit early. A lot of them would probably have done better today. But we also invested in a company called Corvus Energy, which is at the moment, they're the world's leading supplier of batteries for the maritime sector. Not for the, long ocean-going freight, but things like tugs, ferries, smaller cruise ships, etc. And we see that as one part of what is going to need to be a fairly large toolbox for the decarbonization of the maritime fleet, and demand for those batteries is going through the roof at the moment. So it's a very very happy investment for us to have. So at the end of the day, as you say, we've been transporting hydrocarbons. It's part of the value chain. We've been involved in the energy value chain in different shapes and forms. And the energy value chain of the future is going to be more electron-based. And so to remain a player in that same value chain, we have looked at then diversifying into new areas such as solar power generation, battery storage of energy, installation of offshore windmills, etc. But it's really a continuation of the same strategy.
Thank you. Definitely very exciting, and I think you're definitely in the forefront, among shipping companies in terms of investing into new technology and renewables. So very interesting to see. A little bit about the current sentiment. Obviously, last year was all about ESG, the green transition. We saw a lot of money being raised for a number of companies that had sort of promising technologies and concepts within that sector. This year, the focus seems to be shifting quite dramatically. Obviously, we see a lot of geopolitical tension at the moment with the situation in Ukraine, sanctions. I think there's a lot more focus on energy security compared to what we saw last year. Also, of course, prices have been going up for energy across the board, power, oil and gas, and we even saw that before the Russian invasion into Ukraine. And the situation now is actually quite extreme. And I think we see a lot of changes in the market. Obviously, the West is trying to increase production locally, if it's in North America or in Europe, but that will take some time. Do you really, how do you see this impacting the market? Will there be less focus on renewables in the short term? And also, how do you think this potentially can impact the shipping market?
So, I think especially if you look at Europe and the events that have been going on there over the past few weeks now, it's definitely been an eye-opener for the European community in general, and especially when it comes to energy security. And it's a bit of a watershed moment, not just in terms of the geopolitical energy security, which you're seeing play out with Germany and others looking to diversify their gas sources from other countries than Russia, but also from the point of view of having a more robust energy system with more storage and more redundancy, because it was fairly fine-tuned to the point where, as you say, before the invasion of Ukraine, even before then, there was very high energy prices and low storage levels, and you could see that that the system was struggling due to lack of resiliency. So I think there will be a renewed focus on that. Of course, that's partly going to be handled by sourcing additional gas from other areas, building FSRUs, getting more storage, etc. But it will also be solved by renewable energy, and that's perhaps something of a contradiction, because the one thing people tend to say about renewable energy is it's not as secure as thermal generation, and that's true, of course. So for the moment, there needs to be a combination, and we need to find better ways of storing renewable energy, etc. But I think the one thing it really has going for it, especially in a European context, is that for most European countries, there is availability of some renewable energy in most of these countries, whether it's hydro or wind or solar. Most of them have a little bit of that. and so it's their own energy. I mean, you're even now putting in unsubsidized solar farms in the UK. So there is really a genuine possibility to generate your own energy in these countries, and that's why you had the German finance minister refer to renewable energy as the energy of freedom. So I think this will go hand in hand. There will be a very strong push to build out more solar, more wind, more hydro, more storage associated with that, while at the same time increasing the robustness of the traditional energy system for as long as we need to.
Thank you. No, I think I totally agree with you, and I think no matter what's happening in the Ukraine and in the short term in the energy markets, it has been a wake-up call, as you mentioned, and there will be some permanent changes coming out of this. One area that has been sort of forgotten for a while, but is now becoming a focus area again is nuclear. And Singapore recently announced that nuclear will be part of the energy mix also here going forward. The reason for that is basically that they need power and they need to also reach their climate goals. Also, I guess there have been some technological advancements within nuclear in terms of making the technology more secure, even though some people would still say it's somewhat controversial. Do you think this will be a big trend? And if it's a big trend, do you think it will have an impact on, again, the maritime market?
It already is a fairly big trend. If you look at sort of the funding for nuclear companies, which are for the most part, private, it's the levels that we saw last year are beyond anything that we've ever seen before. So there is definitely a lot of capital flowing to nuclear. So the trend is ongoing. I think the way Singapore is approaching it, like many other things in terms of how they approach, whether it's geopolitical and energy security, it's a very measured and analytical response, which is to say that it's going to be part of the mix. And I think, a lot of the time when we talk about nuclear, it's very black and white. It's sort of either you're for it or you're against it. I think that nuclear, it is for sure a part of the energy mix today. It will continue to be for some time. I'm less certain whether this is one of those parts of the toolbox which is going to have a massive impact on the decarbonization of the world. Because the one thing nuclear has always struggled with is growth. Like if you look at the past few years, they've been growing the nuclear generation fleet with maybe 1-2% per annum. Last year we installed maybe a net effect of 5 to 10 gigawatts max, if you're generous, versus about 300 gigawatts of renewable energy. So, the order of magnitude there is just very significant. One of the things that renewable energy is really good at is scaling. And one of the things that nuclear so far has been really poor at is scaling, and we need scale. There's new technologies that might change this. And so, let's see if it does change. But it does take time. These technologies are not just around the corner. An ordinary nuclear power plant takes about 10 years to plan, another 10 years to construct. So let's see. In terms of maritime, again, it's going to take time to first probably work out a commercially scalable modular type of nuclear, and then to take that into a maritime setting. But of course, if it happens, that's a game changer, which we'll have to talk about later.
No, thank you for that perspective, and I think you're also right about the timeline. It will take some time, even if it might be a trend going forward. Let's talk a little bit about the tanker market, which is still core to the business of the BW Group. With all the changes we see in the energy market, talking about the shift to renewable energy in general when it comes to power generation, electrical vehicles. Then again, you have more focus on natural gas again. What is your prediction for the tanker market in the sort of medium to longer term? And do you see any particular subsectors being better positioned compared to others?
So I think our commercial team in Hafnia would be upset if I started highlighting subsectors in the tanker market. It's definitely out of my depth. But I think if you take a bird's eye view, world's oil at the moment, about 50% is being used for the transportation sector. So if you think that is going to electrify over the next, call it 30 or so years, which in the context of shipping is not that long, that's going to have an impact on this market. And it's definitely, if these predictions come true, then you're going to have less transportation of that same oil. Now, how to best sort of position oneself in terms of sub-segments is a little bit difficult to say, but it's definitely already leading to subdued appetite for new building, for instance. And that's coming on top of all the uncertainty around fuel and propulsion, et cetera, and IMO regulation coming in. So, the order book now is about 7% on the tanker side. It's been low for a few years already. Demand is about to pick up. So I would say, it looks good for the segment of ships that are on the water at the moment. And then, let's beyond that, it's a bit difficult to predict, but I think it's going to be a long time before we don't need that transportation anymore. And it could be a very interesting ride for those ships that are currently playing there.
Yeah, thank you. It definitely seems like there's room for both traditional oil and gas and renewables in parallel for some time to come. And that's just the reality of it, even though a lot of people would like to see the transition happening faster than we see today. So I think those are good comments. We're running out of time. Just two very quick questions. There's a lot of talk about green propulsion, and I think that has been a sort of key topic over the last couple of years for the industry. Looking at oil and gas prices suddenly being a lot higher than when this discussion was started, do you think there will be any impact on the transition to dual fuel, other forms of green propulsion for shipping?
Well, I mean, I think energy prices are up across the board, whether it's oil or gas or electricity or whichever use case you're looking at, the energy prices are up. It's part of sort of the general, I guess, inflationary environment that we're in, and that's going to be affecting, it has started affecting some shipping segments positively, and hopefully will affect some others, so you can negate some of those costs. But I think to switch to green fuels is going to be expensive. That is just the way it is, and that cost is certainly increasing with power prices going up. But it's a multiple of X instead of 2x. I mean, we're talking about a very significant increase anyway, so we need to think differently about the costs of fuel. And so I don't think this will have such a big impact. And there is, as we talked about, also a renewed focus on the decarbonization. So I don't see it having an impact on the speed, but it's having an impact on the cost for sure.
Thank you. Just very quickly. You seem to have a very exciting job. What are you spending your time on these days? And are there any key trends that the rest of us should be on the lookout for when it comes to energy transition and the impact on shipping?
I think, if you look at what we're doing, on the one hand, we're looking at what can we do in the near term, and I think that's been discussed in a number of panels. I mean, in most of these projections, one of the biggest challenges that people are talking about is the fact that not enough is happening this decade. So a lot of the silver bullets out there are 2030 and beyond. So for instance, we took 15 of our VLGC carriers and retrofitted LPG propulsion. that's a 20% CO2 reduction per ship. But when you do it on 15 ships, that's the same as decarbonizing fully 3 ships. So we're focusing on kind of whatever we can, whether it's propellers, paint, or retrofits, etc. And then, of course, we look at sort of new sectors, and you're starting to hear about Europe and Japan and others looking at other ways to import energy, which is not via the vector of natural gas. So there's probably going to be markets for CO2 shipping, hydrogen shipping, ammonia shipping, and even if you think that these are going to be much smaller than the current hydrocarbon shipping markets that we have today, which I think they will be, the energy density of these fuels is a lot lower. So, for every natural gas ship that you want to switch with a hydrogen ship, you're going to need 2.6 ships. So even with a small proportion of today's transportation, you could have some very significant needs within these subsegments. But it's still early days, and it's not something that we're looking actively at, but obviously one to watch.
Thank you, Erik. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for the insights. Always a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Joachim. Thank you.